Hey, Xana, Hosanna. Xana, Xana, Hosanna. Hey, Xana, superstars. JC, won't you smile at me? Jesus Christ, if you're divine, turn my water into wine. Prove to me that you're no fool. Walk across my swimming pool. How many enjoyed that movie? Yeah. Anybody not like the movie? How many don't even know about the movie? Yeah, okay. A few of us. All right, yeah. So with those words that tune the rock opera, Jesus Christ Superstar was birthed and captured a glimmer of that first Palm Sunday parade, the nationalistic religious fervor carnival. Hey, Xana, Hosanna. Xana, Xana, hey, Xana, Hosanna. Jesus Christ, if you're divine, turn my water into wine. What a day! What a day. You couldn't believe it. It was a carnival. It was a circus. It was a parade. Hundreds, thousands of Jews jammed into the holiest of holy cities for them. Hundreds and thousands of pilgrims jammed into those narrow little streets that a few of us have had the privilege of walking down when it wasn't jammed. Shoulder to shoulder, arm to arm, body to body. On that day, if you could walk along the sideline, they'd cleared a path for Jesus. You were fortunate. It was Passover, and the city was jammed. It was like a mob at Mardi Gras. And there they were hawkers. Lambs for sale, lambs for sale. Oh, good deal on matzah, good deal on matzah. Hey, come have your Passover dinner at my place. We've got the best dinner. Great food, great food. It was a madhouse, dirty streets, dusty mules, camels baying off in the distance, pilgrims chanting their prayers. And around them, Roman chariots and Roman charioteers riding back and forth. Roll the movies. John Wayne, Charlton Heston, Cecil B. DeMille, they're all there. What a madhouse. What a mess. But it was a great week for business and a great week for making money. And the kids had to love it, all that commotion. Now, the reputation of Jesus had already spread. It was just a few days before that he'd raised this guy named Lazarus from the dead. From the dead. At least that's what the story was. And then as he making his way into town, Jesus healed two men, both of them blind. No more. You can imagine, even without the internet, those stories spreading like wildfire. Jesus, come on, we want some more from you. Can you pull off another one for us? They clamored for another deaf person to hear, or another blind man to be given sight. Oh, or make silky smooth the skin of a leper. They wanted to see the healer in action, this mighty miracle worker. And if they saw a miracle, like the musical says, if they saw a man actually be raised from the dead, they'd believe. Or if the blind given sight, or if the Houdini of the Holy Land could pull off another trick out of his bag, they would believe. Hey, JC, won't you smile at me? If you're divine, turn my water into wine. Prove to me that you're no fool. Walk across my swimming pool. There are people who are like that, you know. They'll believe if they see a sign. That was the atmosphere of what we remember, celebrate today. Palm Sunday, the parade. They were there to see the Houdini of the Holy Land in action. It was like a big tent, the big top, the carnival, the center ring in the action. But Jesus, he would not be the carnival barker that some were looking for. he'd seen enough. Now, Josephus, who's a noted historian, a Jewish historian, from what's called extra-canonical material, in other words, it's not in the Bible, but we know that he was writing concurrent history to what was taking place there. In this extra-canonical material, Josephus let us know that in the previous 5 years, there had been upwards of 20 riots that had taken place in Jerusalem. Now, there was another group in town that day, and they weren't looking for a miracle. They were looking for a leader who would lead them out from under the hands of the Roman rule. A leader who would help them get that Roman boot off their neck. So you have those two groups, and together you put that in, and you have a dangerous cocktail. The town was, maybe euphemistically saying, ready to blow. Hey, Hosanna, Jesus Christ, if you're divine, throw out those bloody Roman swine. That was maybe what they were singing that day. And so you have these two groups at First Palm Sunday, and there were the religious fanatics who said, Jesus, you give me a miracle and I will believe. And then there were those political fanatics who said, restore our freedom. Lead us to freedom from under the Romans. But together, both could have chanted. Both could have chanted, Hosanna to the Son of David. Hosanna to the King of Kings. May the King of Israel come. And that's the way it was that day of Carnival. It was a revolution on the move. And so we're told that after Jesus experienced what's referred to as the Mount of Transfiguration, again, maybe a week before, Jesus goes up. He's got Peter, James, and John, and he has a vision, and there's some huts, some booths there. And God speaks to him directly, and at the conclusion of that, the scripture says he set his face towards Jerusalem. And then the scriptures tell us that his disciples, those nearest to him, begged him, Jesus, they want to kill you. If you go there, you're a dead man. But Jesus had a singular focus. And it was to do the right thing. So why was that necessary? Because those in power weren't doing the right thing, So what was the right thing for them? Well, easily said, self-determination. Their taxes that were collected. Oh, a little bit stayed there, but basically it went back to Rome to continue the Roman domination of themselves. So what would it mean for you and for me to have that same focused resolution that Jesus had to do the right thing? So if you've got your bulletin, I invite you to take a look at the front of the bulletin. Okay, that is a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. Now, it's said that one of the recurring questions he asked of himself was, what can I do that will matter? So many of us will recall in Jean's opening thoughts last week, she talked about how it's not always the big things. Sometimes it's the everyday acts of kindness. It's the little things. It's the right thing to do. And sometimes the right thing to do is, there's nobody here at this unattended parking lot. I guess it's free today, even though the sign says, please pay. Or you tell the right age of your child when you go to the amusement park. Or you tip the maid. Sometimes you go first, sometimes you go last. You tend to the dying, you wipe the tear, you touch the lonely. Friends, I suspect that many of you know this to be true. What is most beautiful is often least acknowledged. Now, for many, sadly, being overwhelmed all of a sudden kind of feels normal. And in the midst of what's taking place, There are several ways to react when faced with such an onslaught of what are experienced as hurt, oppression, the degrading of humanity. One approach is to, go find an ostrich and say, hey, can you dig me a hole? I'd like to, if you have a hole, I'd like, make me one. I'd like to stick my head in the sand. Now, another approach is we keep hoping everything will eventually get better. Now, hope is a good thing. But if that's all it is, I'm just going to keep hoping that things will get better. That's another approach. Some, I know, are just getting depressed, and not clinically perhaps, but just feel like there's the proverbial elephant on their chest, and so sometimes the temptation is to withdraw into ourselves. And another approach is simply to freak out, just like can't handle it. Or you've got those approaches, or what we can do is what has been done in the past. We can ask ourselves, what did MLK do? What can I do? And what is most important? What can I do? What can I be a part of that matters? Now, it could be a gesture that has wide consequences, or perhaps small but significant. It could be things that are seen. It could be things that are unseen. It could be done in a group, or it could just be done by my lonesome. See, Jesus chose a path that day. We call it Holy Week. We call it that he went down the Via Dolorosa. But he also chose what is sometimes called sacred resistance. And in doing so, and by our observing the way Jesus lived, we get to observe what God. Remember, Jesus is God in a bod. And so when we watch Jesus, we are getting a lesson in how God thinks. So we're watching God ride into town. We're surveilling what was going on in the life of God. And God had chosen his path. Now, I've heard a time or two over the years about the conflating of politics in the church, and I'm fine having that discussion. Because, see, while the word politics isn't used in the Bible, there wasn't any need to use the Bible. But we need to be clear, Jesus came into town both as a religious outsider and as a clear political threat. As Gina said, it's the explanation. It's the only explanation as to how anyone goes from being the hero of the crowd on Sunday to being crucified on Friday. Friends, it's no different today than when Jesus rode into town just a short 2,000 years ago. See, the haves are always wanting to keep what they have. And whenever Jesus or you or I speak up on behalf of the have-nots, the poor, the marginalized, in a way that's going to seek to empower them and lift them up, that is going to be a threat. Oh, a huge threat. A threat that needs to be tamped down. A threat that needs to be choked off. And for Jesus, it meant crucifixion. Now, I don't want us to assume that we're all familiar with the Jesus story, but it was the poor, the marginalized, who were always central to his ministry. He spent his life seeing them, noticing them, caring for them, healing them, encouraging them, as they oftentimes were just trying to survive. I like to put myself into the Bible story, and so this week as I thought about it, I was wondering, I wonder as he was riding into town, did his mind kind of flash through some of those highlight reels of his life? As he met Simon Peter's mother, and she'd been sick, so sick that Simon Peter was like, yeah, well, my mom can't come out and see you. And he went in and he healed her fever. What was her facial response? Maybe, did that go through his mind? Or the energy in the house. There was a time when Jesus, there were 4 friends, fifth friend who was paralyzed, and there were so many people inside the house where Jesus was teaching. The only way they could get their friends, see, these friends were determined. We talked about friends a couple of weeks ago. These friends were determined to get their friend to Jesus so he could be healed. They literally cut a hole in the roof and lowered him down so that Jesus like, oh, hello. And he healed that man. And that man picked up his bedding and he walked out. And I have to wonder, did Jesus see his face as he picked up that and walked out? Or perhaps when he healed that woman who had been bleeding for 12 years, or at the pool of Bethesda when the man said, I've been here for 38 years. And when the waters get stirred, I can't get there because I'm paralyzed. And Jesus says, well, are you done being sick and tired? Just in the name of God, I get up and walk. Or he touched the leper. It's kind of like a highlight reel. I'm just imagining this as he walks in, as he rides on the Via Dolorosa. Or maybe he was thinking about the man in the tombs who he was possessed. We're told, the scriptures, the way they describe it is he was possessed by demons. So many demons, it says that the chains couldn't hold him. People were afraid of him. You don't go out there, Johnny. No, I don't care if you play anywhere else. Don't you go out there, man. That guy's woo-hoo. But Jesus went out there and he healed him. And then he walks into town, and the scriptures tell us that the whole town was converted. That's like, you're okay. How did this happen? Is it Jesus? Jesus touched me, and Jesus, this guy wants to come with Jesus and be one of his disciples. Jesus says, no, you stay here. You're going to be my in-resident evangelist right here. The stories, they go on and on, right? You know some of the stories. These are the faces, I imagine, and the experiences Jesus carried into town that day. Those who lived on the margins or outside the margins. Lepers couldn't come into town. That guy I talked about, possessed guy, he was sometimes chained out of town. These were the people that Jesus cared for and ultimately would give his life for. People living like that. Jesus embraced those who otherwise had their hopes crushed by those who wielded privilege and power, those living in desperation. Jesus was determined to do the right thing. So as the grand marshal of his own parade, he'd ride in on a steed worthy of his stature. No. He rode in on a donkey as a sign of unity with the poor, a beast of burden, and the historic reference that Gina gave us. And the poor would be there and they go, this guy gets us. The rich, they laughed. They're like, you got a, come look at my horse, man. I got something worthy to show. But to make sure there was no confusion as to who was in power across the town, another parade, a military parade, the Romans always did this. We know again from Josephus, whenever the Jews would gather to celebrate, there was always a counter parade that would take place with all the pomp and circumstance. Oh, no donkeys, no mighty war horses all decked out with the plumes and all that stuff. The Romans always made such appearances during the Roman festivals. They wanted to remind everybody, we'll let you have your little parade, but don't you forget who's really in charge. And oddly enough, this festival that they're celebrating, some of us, again, it's Passover. What was Passover? It was the Jewish people's liberation from a earlier empire. And so you've got, again, all this layered stuff taking place. Now, we'd be naive to think that the reasons they took Jesus to Jerusalem in that day are not still present in our world today. See, empires changed their looks over the years, but they still retain their place in society. So how does it show itself today? Well, political oppression, ordinary people manipulated and suppressed with little or no voice. Economic exploitation, system and policies which keep the wealth flowing to the wealthy. I suspect most of you know that you pay more taxes than Warren Buffett. I mean, Warren Buffett, God bless him, he's a bazillionaire. They've developed a new word, if I forget what it is. It's a multi-billionaire? Because, some people, you just can't describe them as a billionaire. When you go over like 100 billion or a couple hundred billion, you need a different word for it. I can't remember what it is right now. But Warren Buffett is he's just probably 60, 80 billion. He's a piker in the billionaire club. He has made a point of saying, I pay more my secretary pays more in taxes than I do, okay? And one of the saddest things is that we face today, just like as Jesus did, is religious legitimization. Yeah. When the religious leaders assert that the status quo reflects the will of God. Oh, how sad it was when someone I've kept in contact with sent me just yesterday a link on my phone to watch. It was a Christian seminar, revival of some kind. And this woman, have you been like to the boardwalk and these people can like paint a landscape in like 5 minutes. I couldn't do it in 5 years, and I just marvel at that type of artistic talent. Well, she was creating, she did a drawing of Trump. And in the background was the cross, and people were just like weeping and just like how great this was. And the person who sent me the text was kindly reminding me of something I don't want to be reminded of, and they're not someone who believes. See, the religious legitimization is so present today. So how do we see it today? Well, the appearance is different, but it still rears its ugly head, right? Voter suppression goes unchecked. Buying, is anyone happy that one person can give $250 million for someone? This shouldn't be a left, right, blue, red. It just shouldn't be. It just should be nope, that ain't right. I don't care whose side you're on. See, when religious leaders and those who pretend to be religious hypocritically support people and policies that sanction cruelty. I was 8, maybe 9 years old when America started down the road to intervention in Vietnam. And it divided our nation, right? And one of the phrases that we heard was, America, you can love it or leave it, right? See, we have a long history of being unwilling to look at the unvarnished truth, be it of our present or of our past. And that snowballed to the point where, again, just a little reminder, January 6th, 5 people dead, 138 police officers wounded, 4 more officers would take their lives in the next 7 months. And after that, only 2 of a certain party were willing to serve on a committee that looked into it. And 147 then went on after that event voted not to certify the results of an election. You see, sometimes we're like horses who have, we've got our blinders on. And our nation is at a perilous point, friends. As with Jesus, the need for a face-off with the privileged class, it's upon us, right? And we must see metaphorically the humble, burden-bearing donkey face up to the powerful war horse. We have to have eyes to see with clarity the continued struggle between what God wants. We call that, we'll say that in our prayer, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Hey, God, what you have up there, we want down here. So there's that tension between what God wants and earthly empires. To be sure, out and about, there are those who are acts of kindness and generosity, doing thankless tasks, putting their energy to those who need. We'll see it with the unsung public servants in government, law enforcement, doing the right thing. Fred Rogers says, look for the helpers. We see it in teachers, school counselors, social workers trying to close the gap of need. We see it in those who bear the burden of the tasks that make more life bearable. Trash collectors, those who clean the bathrooms, nurses, doctors, hospice workers, administrative assistants, and on and on. Our call, sisters and brothers, is to stand for God's way. Again, it's not left or right, red or blue, Republican or Democrat. We are to stand for all that is God's way. To do that when others are looking, and sometimes when others will never see us. That is, after all, what Jesus did and does for us. Jesus didn't march into Jerusalem to call attention to himself or have the hope that his march would go viral on the internet. He rode into Jerusalem to say to those in power, see those who are on the edge of losing their homes because they can't find work that pays a living wage. Jesus rode into town and sees those who are spiraling into depression and addiction. Jesus rides into Jerusalem to challenge how children in this land of plenty are going to bed hungry and are most vulnerable to food scarcity. Jesus rides into town to take on everything that steals the dignity of those living on the margins and those that destroy God's creation for their own economic gain. Jesus rode into town to remind those in places of religious influence to love God, love and serve their neighbors as themselves. And as he said to those cheering him on, if you don't do it, the very rocks themselves will cry out. So why does it seem so radical to simply do the right thing? Because the way of God flies in the face of what's sold to us as, that's just the way it is. We'll see what happens. Que sera, sera. What will be, will be. Sacred resistance is what Jesus embodied on this day all those years ago. And sacred resistance is what's needed today. It doesn't mean you have to do anything dramatic. It only means you have to take seriously your intention to follow Jesus, who embodies this crazy idea that kindness and caring, tenderness and justice, friendship and solidarity, and love are the things that matter most of all. Hey, Zana ho, Zana. Zana, Zana, hey. Zana ho, Zana, hey. Zana. Amen.